Back when you were in Congress, you voted to withhold U.S. funding for the United Nations, and this was during a time when the UN was getting terrible publicity, rightly so, for corruption and in a whole host of areas, actually.
Right.
And that I realized that was part of the motivation at the time for that initiative. What do you? Would you favor a similar initiative today, though, in terms of withholding funding from the United Nations? What is your view of the proper role of the United Nations in the world? Is it a useful institution?
I do not have a high opinion of the United Nations. It is a useful institution under the right kind of leadership, and the institution has suffered from a lack of good leadership for as long as I can remember. I tended to vote against. Back in those days, the issue was. There was a term for it. When Reagan froze funding for the United Nations, and it lasted for 15 years or so on. And when I was there were efforts to try to go pay the back payments of the United Nations back, which I never supported. And you're right, most of those votes were a function of some episode of corruption or some function of a United Nations initiative that might have taken place in one area or another that tended to work against America's national interests. So the only leverage a member of Congress has is when it comes to the power of the purse. And I never hesitated on the United Nations and on occasion some other international organizations that one, especially in the House, that one vote that you have to send a message, even though that message isn't particularly a strong one, but it is one nonetheless. It does result in United Nations people showing up in the office wanting to know. At least wanting to have that one meeting. So that had more to do with than anything else. Yeah, the United Nations certainly can be useful in certain circumstances under prudent leadership. In particularly natural disasters, famine relief, even in the post-invasion phase in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. United Nations missions have been somewhat helpful in bringing assets from other nations to help provide, to try to rebuild economies of war-torn regions of the world. Japan's contribution to Afghanistan has been done to a large degree independently, but to a large degree as well through United Nations support and assistance in Afghanistan. And their constitution forbids them from deploying troops. And so the way they compensate for that is through various economic redevelopment efforts through the United Nations, sometimes directly with partnerships in the United States. So that's a good example, I suppose, of how the UN is able to bring other nations together to help support what we're trying to accomplish, either with them or independently.
How do you